Hello and welcome. This is Magic Bricks Now and you're watching Property Hotline with me, Kavita Krishnan. If legal issues are troubling you related to real estate, pick up that phone, make that call, numbers on your screen, because Vinay Singh is in the studio today and we are answering all your legal queries. Vinay, as you all know, is a legal and tax expert. Welcome to the show, Vinay. Let's start with a question that's coming on our website. Manoj Bhargav has written in and he says that he owns a property in Jaipur that he plans to sell. Now the buyer is suggesting that he will make initial payments and will then give Manoj post-dated checks. Now the buyer wants his name to be registered in the property along with the post-dated checks. The details of the post-dated checks will be mentioned in the registered deed. It will also be clearly mentioned in the deed that the registration will be cancelled if the checks bounce. Now Manoj wants to know if it is advisable to enter into such an arrangement. What do you say, Vinay?
Well, Kavita, theoretically this sounds great.
Exactly.
In practice, it's never going to work. For the simple reason that if a check bounces, then again you have to go to court to enforce it. Or if you need to cancel, then both of them have to go and register a cancellation deed. And then what happens if your buyer fails to cooperate with you at that point in time? So this is a very bad idea. I think when you are selling property, the only way out is that I get my money as soon as I sign over the property to you. How you fund it is your problem. There are banks, there are friends, there are relatives, or wherever you want to raise the loan from. But I don't think you should extend credit.
Do not extend credit. Key takeaway coming in there: if you're selling property, do not extend credit. Ensure that you get your money upfront when you sign on that dotted line to transfer the property to somebody else. Moving on, we have an email query now. Shiva Ramakrishna has written in and says that he purchased an apartment in Prestige Fern Residency, Bengaluru. He bought it during the pre-launch stage in 2013. He wants to sell it. It'll be ready to move in within 3 months. Now, he wants to know what the procedure involved in selling an under construction property is. He also wants to know how he can collect payment from the buyer.
Well, the question is a little strange because I understand that he bought it in a pre-launch stage. So obviously at that juncture, there was no agreement. I'm going with the presumption that there is some form of an agreement now. Now, Karnataka, generally the agreements are such, there are two agreements. One that the builder says that he will procure labor and materials and construct the flat for you. And the second agreement gives you an undivided share in the land in proportion to your unit. So, let's presume that that is what has happened here. First thing to ensure is that you have proper agreements which are duly registered, otherwise transferring title will be impossible. Second thing is you have to check whether there is anything preventing you from transferring it at this stage. In your earlier contract, if the builder says like you will not transfer it, for example, till I've given you possession, you do have clauses like this which are common. So you need to check that out. What you shouldn't be doing is trying to do a tripartite where you are getting the money and the builder is transferring the title to your buyer, because theoretically those agreements, technically they are not legal.
Okay, so you're saying they are not legal. So first you need to ensure that you have both the agreements that you speak of. In Karnataka, remember, there are two agreements, like Vinay said. One which says that the developer is providing you a service, he is building this, he's constructing a particular building for you, and the other one where you're getting the actual share in the property, the share certificate in a way. So you can only transfer this property once you get both these agreements in your hand, and once both of these agreements are registered. You need to register the agreements first, after which you can sell it to the next person in line. Because unless you register it, the title is really not in your name. You need to do that, and also you need to check whether the developer has any lock-in which prevents you from selling before possession. Right? Moving on, we have Diburanjan Sahu, who's dialed in from Delhi. How can we help you, Diburanjan?
Hi, ma'am. Hi, sir. So
Hello.
my question is that I am staying in Delhi. Actually, I have bought a property in Bangalore.
Okay.
The property is about to be completed and the registration formalities to be done within next 1 month. And we are the joint owner of the property, me and my wife. My question is that due to some reason, my wife will not be able to travel to Bangalore. So is it possible to execute the registered sale deed? Like I can do alone or not? That is my question. Like with some kind of GPA or SPA, general power of attorney or special power of attorney, is it possible to go ahead with the registration process?
Can they do that? Can a power of attorney work?
Absolutely, Mr. Sahu, there is no problem. If you are residing in Delhi, All you need to do is your wife can give you a power of attorney with one rider that you need to get this power of attorney registered at the sub-registrar's office. Do not land up in Bangalore with a notarized power of attorney, because the Registration Act itself says that you can give a power of attorney for this purpose, but it has to be registered. So it's absolutely, I mean, you would need a little time to, go down to the registrar's office and get that document registered, but she need not travel to Bangalore at all, no problem.
So fairly simple procedure there. Get a power of attorney drafted, get it registered, take the registered power of attorney with you when you go to Bangalore, and get your apartment registered. Moving on, we have a website query now. Siriaco says his society has gone into litigation regarding meetings not held and books not in order. The registrar has taken over the society. The committee was dissolved. There's a letter from the registrar, but the committee had not informed the residents of the same. Now, he wants to know if it is mandatory for the secretary to send residents a circular regarding the changes. He says it's been 2 months since this happened. The registrar has seized the accounts as well. How can they resolve this issue? Society problems over there. What can they do?
Well, what I understood is that there is some kind of an administrator appointed there. Once it goes into the hands of the administrator, then there is very little that you can do. I am not sure about the timeline, but the Maharashtra Cooperative Societies Act was amended in February 2013. From that date onwards, it is not possible for a society, for the registrar to appoint an administrator. It is because this has come by the constitutional amendment passed by Parliament, and you are only supposed to self-govern. Unfortunately, what the Maharashtra government has tried to do is it has tried to circumvent this whole thing by providing in section 77A that they can appoint an authorized person under certain circumstances. Now, the past experience of societies where administrators, or you may call him now an authorized person, has not been very happy. There has been little or no administration. There have been allegations of all kinds of malfeasance, including money matters, money being siphoned off and things like that. So there is an option in section 77A. What you could ask the registrar to do is to appoint a 3-member committee from amongst your members. So it is your own people. If the registrar does not agree to this, then you can tell him that you can appoint whoever you like as your person, but one of our members will be co-signatory to the bank account, so that no money can be spent by that gentleman without some person from your society being party to it. Of course, the person you nominate should be, above board and things like that, and you should have faith in him. So I think this is how you should go about it. If you can get it back from the registrar into your hands, great. Otherwise, you can do this, appoint somebody.
So they can actually go to the registrar and say that appoint a member from a society, so-and-so gentleman is an upright and honest person and we trust him. He will be our representative on that 3-member committee.
Yeah, the 3-member committee has to be from the society. Registrar has the power to appoint his 1 or more administrators or authorized persons. But as I said, because the experience has not been a happy one, even if he wants to do that, make sure that as far as signing checks is concerned, one of your persons is made a party to it.
Right. So does that person also need to be a signatory on the check?
Yes, that's the whole idea.
That's essentially what you're saying,
that's
right?
The whole idea.
Also, before we move on, Vinay, very clearly, I guess what Siriaco also wants to know here is what are his rights as a member of the society. Now, when such huge changes are happening within the society's managing committee, where the committee is being dissolved and it has gone into litigation and an administrator has taken over the society. The fact that most of the housing society is in the dark about it, is that fair? Shouldn't they be informed? And how should that actually be done?
See, what happens here is that once an administrator is appointed, by whatever name you choose to call him, it is his responsibility and his right also, his prerogative, to communicate what is happening to the members. And the secretary, whoever may have been the secretary or the chairman or managing committee members, now no longer have any right.
But as a managing committee, if I'm dissolving the managing committee, as a chairman of the committee, shouldn't I be informing the society that the committee is being dissolved?
Yes, now it becomes the administrator's job or the registrar's job to intimate to the society that your managing committee is dissolved and here is the person whom I have appointed as the administrator. Now, as I said, the past experience has been that these gentlemen do not communicate, they don't hold meetings,
right.
and so on and so forth.
Once now the administrators come in, do I have the rights as a member because of all the changes that have happened? Can I go and ask them to show me a statement of accounts?
Absolutely. See, the administrator simply replaces the committee, and it is he now who will have to do everything: call for meetings, prepare accounts, get them audited. If a transfer application comes, then he will look at it instead of the managing committee. He just replaces the managing committee for that.
So is he supposed to conduct elections and ensure
Yes.
that the new managing within how much time?
Yeah, he can conduct the election, but you see, if there is a problem within the society, first that problem has to be resolved, and then he will conduct the election. What my view is that if the elections were due anyway, that could be one alternative where you can go to the registrar and says, all right, there have been problems, but elections are due anyway, so why don't you conduct elections and let us elect a fresh committee? That is also one possibility.
Right, so essentially these are your rights. If you're a member of a society, it is well within your rights to know what is going on over there. If there is litigation, if your society is going into litigation, you're supposed to know about it. Your managing committee should be informing you. If not, whoever the administrator comes in, whoever's appointed, is duty bound to inform you about changes that are happening within the managing committee of the society. If the managing committee is dissolved, you need to know about it as a member of the society. Also, you're well within your rights to walk up to the administrator who has been appointed by the registrar and ask for a statement of accounts. Because at the end of the day, it is your hard-earned money that is going in to maintaining that society. So you have every right to walk up to them and ask them to take a look at the accounts and also have a say in what is going on within your housing society. Moving on, we have a Facebook query coming in. Harshad Patil wants to know how much it will cost if an aunt, that is his father's sister, wishes to transfer ownership of land, non-agricultural land, to her nephew via stamp paper. Since this is a transfer between relatives, he asks if there is any provision for exemption from paying this amount. He also asks if the transfer should be done via conveyance or gift deed, and wants you to elaborate on the process of registration and transfer. I think you'll have some good news for him, right?
No, unfortunately, I
No?
wouldn't have any good news in this case, because Article 34 says that you will end up paying stamp duty at 5% generally. But if the first proviso gives you a break, if you are transferring to your spouse or your lineal ascendant or descendant, then or siblings, then you are entitled to a reduced rate of 2%. And then you have a second proviso which came into effect last year, which again limits it to lineal descendants, and in that event you would be entitled to do it for 200 rupees. So these are all sublimits which you need to study carefully. Unfortunately, both of these do not apply to an aunt giving to a nephew, so you would have to pay 5% anyway. Now, whether to take it as a gift or a conveyance is your choice. If you have the money to pay it, you can pay it, because anyway the stamp duty is not going to change. You can pay that and you can be the owner as a purchaser. If paying the money is an issue, then you can take it as a gift.
So the 200 rupee gift deed that you're speaking about, Vinay, will only apply if the transfer is being done from father to son, mother to daughter, father to daughter, etc.
Absolutely.
Not between the spouse. As in, if my husband were to transfer property to me.
No, spouse will work there, but lineal ascendants won't. You cannot give to your mother.
To my mother.
Or you can't give to your father. That would then fall into your category of 2%.
Okay. So then so then there are three categories over here. Within relatives, as in if it's outside the immediate family of mother, father, brother, sister, mother, father and children, then you have to pay 5%. Between, if you're transferring property to your parents, it would, it would attract a charge of 2%. And if you were to transfer property to your children, then you can do that with a 200 rupee gift deed. But if you're transferring property between aunt and nephew, then you have to pay the 5% stamp duty charge. Website query next. Kirti writes in, says she bought a flat in 1972 in her mother-in-law's name. Her father-in-law was a nominee. Now her mother-in-law passed away in 1995. The society also underwent redevelopment post that. Her father-in-law signed the documents for the same. He later gifted the property to Kirti's husband. However, her sister-in-law now is claiming rights in the property. The society is saying that unless the matter is settled, they won't give them the keys. There's no court case. How can they settle the matter? That's a very, very complex question over there.
It is a complex question, and most people who manage societies have never really understood the difference, let alone the members who live in those societies. As far as I can see, is the mother-in-law passed away. If she didn't make a will, she left behind her husband and children as heirs. So, for the sake of argument, if we say there are just two, so her property would then devolve three ways, assuming again she is a Hindu. So, there the sister-in-law would have a share, unless there was a will, leaving it to just say the husband. So, now what happens is that theoretically the sister-in-law does have the share. Since the husband was nominated, the shares got transferred to him. Now, membership in the society and ownership of the property is not necessarily the same. So, while the father-in-law became the member, the shares were held by three people, including the sister-in-law. Now, this is a complicated thing, and how to get resolved and how the other people would get their share is a different story. But so far as the society is concerned, in the absence of a court order, they have no business saying that I will not do anything till you resolve this. Society is concerned only with its member. Who was the father-in-law? He has gifted it to his son. That's the end of the story. You look at the son. If you have a stay order from a court saying that do not effect transfers and so on and so forth till the issue is resolved, then yes, you have to follow to the T what the court tells you.
What you're saying essentially over here is that the society is duty bound to give the keys to
Absolutely.
Kirti and her husband.
Absolutely.
After that, where the property goes, who inherits the property is something that they need to resolve if they want to go to court or whether they want to settle it out of court.
Yes,
That's
it is not the society's brief to interfere in matters of testamentary jurisdiction, which is precisely why you have things like nomination.
Right. I'll come back to nomination a bit. I wanted to speak to you about that. However, in this particular case, now the society is refusing point blank to give the keys. What can Kirti do? Like you said, they are in the right. They are supposed to get the keys from the society. The society has no business over here denying them the keys. How can they ensure they get it?
I think first thing is that you write to them and tell them that you need to hand over the keys to me because you have no concern in this so-called dispute, if at all we can call it a dispute, and there is no court order preventing. You are supposed to recognize me and not anybody else, even if that person does happen to be a part owner of that property today. And if of course they refuse to do so, your best thing would be to approach the registrar and raise a dispute there and ask him to direct the society to hand over the keys to you. I don't think there should be any issue because the point is extremely clear so far as I can see it. It's just that the society is not clear on how it should act.
Will serving the society a legal notice help?
Definitely. You write a letter. If that does not work, then you send them a legal notice, and then if that does not work, you go to the registrar.
So that's what you need to do, Kirti. But before we move on, this is a very important issue, and this is one that we were discussing when we went into the break, Vinay, that the difference between nomination and inheritance of property. How do both of them differ? If my father were to nominate me in the property, do I also stand to inherit that property automatically, or do I need other papers to inherit it?
You don't inherit anything by nomination. The use of nomination is one that, and it's been created for that reason, that if somebody dies and there are a lot of legal heirs, if they battle it out in court, which may last for decades given our system, the question is who will pay the society's dues, which is why there is a system of nomination which says that the person can nominate whom the nomination will go, the shares and the flat would go to, but he or she holds it in trust for the real legal heirs. The title to the property will get transferred either by will or by the personal law of the person, depending on whether he's Hindu, Muslim, Christian, so on and so forth. As I said, the use is good. So like for example, if I was to want to leave it to my wife, I would nominate her. At the same time, I would also make a will leaving the property to her. The nomination will ensure that society will not ask questions pertaining to will and probate and things like that, but merely transfer it to her immediately, and the will transfer the title.
So essentially the difference is this, like when I put it, if you want someone to inherit your property, if you want to ensure that your son or your daughter stands to inherit your property, then make a will. If you have a property, you have to make a will. It is very simple. Nomination is nothing, it only transfers the trusteeship of the property. So in effect, if when you're no more, the society by through nomination is just ensuring that the maintenance bills gets paid. There is somebody who is there to pay all the bills and to sign whatever necessary papers are there. The person is just a legal trustee, nothing more than that. So if you want somebody to inherit property, ensure that you make a will. Email query next. Peter Mark wants to know if it is mandatory to obtain an occupancy certificate for an independent house, a row house, He also wants to know if an occupancy certificate is applicable to a Gram Panchayat approved building. I believe it's basic. You need an occupancy certificate in any case,
Absolutely,
right?
because without the occupancy certificate, say for example in the city of Mumbai, you have no right to occupy that flat. The builder has no right to give you possession of the flat. You cannot officially apply for a legal water connection without an OC. And I mean, I could just go on and on. I mean, even if you have taken an insurance and tomorrow there's a problem there, the insurance company may repudiate your contract for the simple reason you're residing there illegally. Say if the building crashes, for example. So there are a lot of implications. Coming to the Gram Panchayat, now a Gram Panchayat may not have an OC, but they may have something called a completion certificate, or they may have an OC. In any events, you do need a certificate from the Gram Panchayat saying that the building has been properly completed. So there you are. There's no escaping this occupation certificate or the completion certificate.
You know, essentially, this is something that all our viewers need to be very clear about. What does an occupancy certificate essentially certify? It certifies that your building is safe for human habitation. It means that the fire department has come and checked if the building is safe from the point of view of fire, if all the fire safety norms are complied with. It means that the local body has come and checked the building whether it is in line with all the regulations, and has also agreed to provide basic utilities, which means it's only once the OC comes in that you're going to get your water, your electricity and your sewerage connection, all of which are extremely important if you're going to live in that building. Trust me, if you don't have an OC, then it's going to be even costlier for you to live in that house. It is illegal, like Vinay pointed out. More than that, it's going to be very, very costly, because then you are going to have to find your own source of water and your own source of electricity, and you'll have to also put the sewerage system in place. So insist on an OC, only move in once you get the OC. There is nothing called a fit out possession. You need to have an OC in your hand before you move into that house.
I just want to add one small thing here. If you have been reading the news, you will realize that the municipal corporation has issued notices in Andheri, for example, in and around the Gilbert Hill area, to old societies, buildings which are perhaps 10 to 15 years old, saying that you don't have an occupancy certificate, kindly vacate. So this is also the kind of trouble that you may face in the future with the authorities.
Right. In fact, the local body is well within its rights to demolish the building if there is no OC. And we've already seen a case like that in Mumbai. Let's move on. Now, Kuttappan has posted a question on our website. He says that Vijay Builders and Developers in Bengaluru is asking buyers for the VAT amount via cash. Now, if a buyer refuses to pay VAT via cash, they are harassed. The builder takes a sale document directly from the registrar's office without their knowledge and threatens the buyers. They've also sent goons to their home. Kuttappan wants to know if it is legal for a builder to ask for VAT to be paid in cash. He wants to know what legal recourse the buyer can take. He's asking for payment in cash. He's sending goons to their homes. Obviously, it can't be legal. what can Kuttappan do here?
I am sure that this particular builder is not very popular with the residents. Having said that, last year we had a change in the taxation laws which said that you can't pay more than 20,000 rupees in cash when you're buying a house. Now, it might be a little grey area. You could argue that this is not towards the purchase of the house, but then you're paying VAT. So I would still say that it extends to that. So long as you're getting a receipt, normally this does not present a problem, but I can't see any reason, or I can't think of any reason why he would want this amount in cash until and unless he does not intend to pay it. So I would not advise you to pay the cash. I would advise you to ask the builder and put it on record that while you are willing to pay it, you will pay it by any of the official methods of payment, which is check, demand draft or NEFT or RTGS, but place it on record that you intend to pay. Write him a registered letter, get an acknowledgement of that, and then take it forward from there. If he accepts it, great. If he doesn't accept it and you are not getting your agreement, etc., then you take action.
And if the builder sends goons to his home, can he go to the police and file a complaint?
Of course, he can go to the police, and I think if he's doing this with multiple people, we always say that you get together as a group and then you go to the police or whichever authority or forum you want to go to, because then it proves the fact that 20 people or 100 people could not possibly be making up the story.
Strength in numbers always helps. With that, we're coming to an end of our show. However, let me give you a wrap of our key takeaways. Do not extend credit when selling property. That is the first thing that we learned. If you are selling property, ensure that you get the money up front. Secondly, if you're living in a housing society, you have a right to be informed of all developments in the society in the managing committee. You can ask for a statement of accounts if you think there's a discrepancy there. Thirdly, if you're buying property, ensure that you get an OC before you move into that property. An OC ensures that your home is safe and it is legal for you to occupy that particular property. And finally, if you have a property and you want to will it to someone, ensure that you write a will. If you have a property, it's very simple, make a will. A nomination does not suffice. That's all the time that we have on today's episode of Property Hotline. Vinay, thank you very much for coming in. If you have any questions related to real estate, whether it's about buying, selling, investing in property, legal issues like we answered today, home finance queries, or taxes and real estate, get in touch with us. We'll get the country's top experts to answer each and every one of them. Thank you very much for tuning in. Keep watching Magic Bricks Now.
You can watch live TV on our website mpnow.in. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/magicbricksnow. And don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at Magic Bricks Now. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/magicbricksnow.